Today's title is Jesus is the Christ. There has been no one who has been misunderstood as much as Jesus in history. What's more surprising is that despite the fact that Jesus clearly defined who he was, who he is, and who will be, so many times people have misunderstood him. Even though this phenomenon is nothing new to believers, because this is not only today's phenomenon, this fact is still wonderful and amazing to us believers. But when you think of this from the view of limited atonement, it is no wonder that unbelievers have misunderstood like that. So then, who do we say that Jesus is? The answer to this question is very crucial to believers. We can even say that the answer to this question is everything to believers. The answer is simple. Jesus is the Christ and the Son of the living God. Now, let's appreciate the meaning of Jesus is the Christ and what faith we have to confess. In verse 13, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" When Jesus reached the region named after the conqueror, the emperor at that time, he asked the disciples who people say he is and who the disciples consider him to be. The reason why Jesus asked this is not because he really wondered about that, but because he intended to draw a right confession from his disciples. First, Jesus asked them about people's beliefs about him. The disciples answered this question, but they presented only positive reflections of people, although there were also negative reflections of people, such as a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, the man who makes miracles by Beelzebub's power, and so on. In verse 14, and they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Some considered Jesus as resurrected John the Baptist. Some people believed that Jesus was Elijah, who had been prophesied to come right before the Messiah's coming in the Old Testament. Some said that Jesus might be Jeremiah because they saw Jesus' tears for Jerusalem and his passion. Some thought that Jesus was one of the prophets who appeared occasionally and saved their ancestors. However, even these positive reactions of the people were wrong. Jesus now asks his disciples about the same question. It is a very important moment. This is because he could leave the people's reflection at that, but his own disciples' thoughts were so crucial. So Jesus requested their opinions. In verse 15, he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And at the Jesus question, immediately the accurate and right answer came upon. In verse 16, Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." As the best pupil, Peter replied to that question directly. Christ means the anointed one. There are three offices that are referred to as anointed in the Old Testament. The offices of a prophet, a priest, and king. The offices perform these things respectively: proclaim the truth and prophecy, and forgive their own chosen people's sins, and rule over the entire universe. All these three offices belong to Jesus. He is the only one who has all these offices and performs these duties at the same time. Namely, he is the Messiah. Jesus is the Christ and the Son of the living God. And Jesus mentioned about the accurate and right confession of Peter in verse 17. And Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Jesus acknowledged Peter's confession and blessed him, and mentioned his blood of the son of John Simon. Then Jesus said a very important point. The fact that Peter could confess this perfect faith was not due to the instructions or traditions of his blood and his environment, but due to God's own revelation. God revealed these truths to Peter and had him know this secret, lightening his sinful, dark mind, awakening his intelligence and the region that had been totally ignorant of God's truth owing to his sinfulness as a man. People have recognized Jesus as a saint, a man of virtue, a wise man, a person with supernatural powers, a great devotee, a friend of orphans and widows, a revolutionist, an independentist, and so on. The bigger problem is that what we call churches even have gotten Jesus marked down as those kind of a person. Jesus is the Christ who has the essence of the three offices explained above as the one anointed. As the absolute standard, he reveals the truth and fact which have been and will be applied to all the times and all the places. As a unique and perfect way, he achieved the atonement only by faith of Jesus Christ for his own chosen people. As the absolute and perfect king, he ruled all things, including both metaphysical and physical in the universe. This is what Christ declared in the Bible. Jesus is the Christ. Especially, he is the one who will save his people from their sins. Of course, Jesus was a friend of orphans and widows. He made lots of miracles and cured many terminally ill. And he instructed the loving one's neighbors as the prime value of Christianity. Yes, the same applies today. Jesus is our comforter and guide of our lives. He even heals many diseases here and there all over the world today. The loving one's neighbors is still an important virtue of Christianity. But we must remember that all of these things are for indicating the attributes of Christ. The purpose, function, and value of these things, comforting our soul and guiding our lives to a level road, healing diseases and making miracles, and the loving neighbors, all these things are for recognizing the fact that Jesus is the truth. Jesus is the only way to being saved from the sins, and Jesus is the King to rule all things forever. That is to say, Jesus is the purpose itself of the world. What is the best way to love our neighbors? It is obvious that the best way to love our neighbors is to have them believe Jesus. Not to let them directly go to hell grasping their own sins as it is, and instruct them the truth that man must serve and enjoy God, their creator, the creator of the universe, their controller. For this, Only for this, we give them our concerns, times, money, clothes, respect, and we understand their situation and we yield up our benefits, take care of the needy. Christianity without this value is not Christianity. It is just a religious institute in the local community or a charity. Jesus is the Christ. He is the main character in history. There is Jesus not for humans' well-being, but even all things, including human beings, are for him here in history. When man confesses this, Jesus is the Christ, finally, the man enjoys a real life, well-being, because he is the creator and controller, and we are creatures of him. Is Jesus also the Christ? No. Only Jesus is the Christ. Is Jesus the greatest and most influential man in the history? No. He is the Son of the living God who had both the divinity and the humanity. He is the Christ. And also, Jesus emphasizes an important point. One man can recognize this fact that Jesus is the Christ is only by God. It is not by government policies or the result of the repeated educations or one's backgrounds to evangelize is our part, but the result of it totally depends on God. To move man's heart belongs to God's realm, Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit who the Bible promised us to send, visit, abides, and works in one's heart. God, or the Holy Spirit, has our broken regions and sensitivities function right. As a result of it, we finally recognize the presence of God and his governing. Jesus answered to Peter, "For flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Here is the appropriateness of our mission. There are people to whom God revealed the truth. This is a unique guarantee of our evangelizing. God works. God reveals the truth to his chosen people, and it affects without exception. This is the why and the guarantee of our mission. Jesus is the Christ and the Son of the living God, and God has chosen people knowing this truth, a historical fact. Jesus acknowledged only this confession of Peter, and Jesus declared that he will establish his own churches on this confession. So, if some churches are not this confession, those are not God's church, even though they call them churches. Everyone, do we confess Jesus as the Christ and the Son of the living God? And do we believe the fact that it is possible only by God's choice and God's revelation? If so, we must live as God's chosen people in the midst of this world that has gone by as if there is no God, no absolute truth, no God's sovereignty. I really long for you to be able to confess this right truth. Jesus is the Christ. Let me pray.